Hey Toby, what do you want to do today?
Exactly the same as every day, Bibi. We will conquer the world.
But we already did that yesterday, didn't we?
Really? Then, well, what about talking about creativity? Cars can't fly? We show you that with creativity, everything is possible and that this wonderful ability is in every single one of us.
Listen now and learn more about your personal creative ability and its importance for you, for organizations, and for society.
Hey, Bibi.
Yeah,
Are you here? Can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
I'm here.
I have a virtual reality thing here. Do you want to test that and dive right into the future of factory automation?
Oh yeah, I would love to. I've never tried it out before, but I'm a bit scared actually.
Just here. Take it, try it out, and you will afterwards actually be able to judge how virtual reality will or can probably change our lives and what's probably the real value or also risk of the metaverse. And that's actually what we were talking about with Adi, right?
Yeah, and actually, I hope that this conversation would really help me to feel more confident with using virtual reality and all the metaverse stuff.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out what's the value of it. And that's what we're going to discuss with Adi. What else did we touch upon?
Yeah, apart from that, we also talked about why stories are so important for the industrial metaverse, for the future, actually.
And what's an immersive storyteller like, probably. And we learned a lot. And I think Adi is a very interesting person with a lot of experience in his life. He already been part of Meta or Facebook and did a lot of jobs there. And I would say that's enough. Enjoy this session.
Hello and welcome, dear listeners. Today we have a new special English episode with a guest from Wales. We could call our today's podcast a creative mastermind of the future. He is an immersive strategist and was previously working as global metaverse lead at Charlotte Tilbury, which is a brand selling makeup and skincare, and he was global creative product lead at Facebook, now known as Meta. At Meta, he led the emerging platforms team exploration of virtual reality and extended reality and immersive experiences. We're super curious to find out what that exactly means and what he really did. What's also really interesting, he studied architecture before changing careers to build creative strategies, experience designs, and innovation frameworks focused on immersive architecture for organizations all around the world. So in all he has done, he shows a passion for telling stories. He calls himself a story whisperer, and I love that, by the way, and for exploring the creative potential of the immersive world. And we are curious how he is doing that and how he got to that. So, hi, Adipat Virdi. Welcome to the Siemens podcast. Nice to have you here.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So yeah, very excited for this conversation.
Welcome, Adi, also from my side. Glad to have you here. So did we tell the truth? Is that everything correct, what Bibi was telling about you?
Yeah, well, it's fine, but you use, one has to use these fancy words when it's on LinkedIn and so forth. But if we strip all of this away, it's that word storyteller. I think this is all about narrative. It's all about how we tell stories and essentially how we connect, right? So I think that's what I really do. And that's what I love doing, is how we can connect as human beings, as society, and, pave the way for something that's a better future. So that's what I think is the truth.
Beautiful. So you have a passion for storytelling. Did that start somehow in your life, early in your childhood, probably? I don't know. Do you have a moment in your life where you notice, there's really a power in telling beautiful stories? Is there anything?
Yeah. There's two things that come to mind. I remember when I was studying so when you're 15, you do the GCSEs here. I don't know what the equivalent is where you are, but it's, I remember doing this English, creative writing course. And, I was struggling. And I remember at the end when you had to submit everything, I sort of wrote 3 stories, overnight, handed it in. And it was like, applauded, they loved it. And I thought, do you know what? I think I have a talent for this. But importantly, it was, I come from an Indian background, right? And my parents were very much architecture, medicine, or law. What do you want to do with your life? So I was like, oh, great. And it's interesting that we're talking about creativity because all I wanted to do was something with creativity. And so architecture was the closest to that. But all I ever wanted to do was to write and make films. And that passion for storytelling has always been there. And I still do it. Like, we'll come on to that. But it's something that is core to what I do in my life.
So you already mentioned it's the topic about creativity and how it is probably linked to storytelling. And we will dive deeper into that as well. But can you tell us, first of all, or that's the most important question we ask everybody in this podcast, of course, it's called Talking Creativity. So what is your perception, your perspective on creativity? What is it for you? What does it mean for you? What is it?
Do you know, that's a really good question because I have a sort of an emotional response to that, but I also have a sort of thoughtful response. And in essence, it's about patterns. It's about spotting patterns for me. It's about being able to think outside the box. It's being able to, challenge the status quo. And I think, it's about thinking in shades of gray. And what I mean by that is it's like the world seems to be quite binary in terms of how it makes, judgments, how we sort of take a situation and say, well, this is either right or wrong or this or that. And actually, to be able to dive deeper into that and really think about the nuance, I think that is where creativity is. And also, for me, it's the difference between a linear path and an ecosystem. Creativity is an ecosystem. You have to be a sponge as well as a web, if you know what I mean. You've got to absorb and be able to sort of, look at things in different lateral ways. So I don't know if that's too amorphous a definition, but that's kind of where creativity is for me.
I like it. I like this description.
And how do you live that? I mean, we will talk about the business context in more detail afterwards, but what about your personal life? Do you somehow live creativity? Do you have routines or anything special that you do to stay creative, to be creative?
See, that's an interesting question because I think routine is anathema to creativity. So if you have routine, you can't be creative. And I think that's the other thing. You've got to be flexible, right? But to answer your question, one of the things I'm very interested in is I'm always asking questions to get to the truth of what the core question is, what the core thing is that somebody's talking about. And I remember there was this, I don't know if you've read it, there's a book by Roland Barthes called Mythologies, right? And he talks about masks that we wear in society. So you and I at the moment, we're wearing masks, right? Because we don't know one another. And the whole point of getting to know one another is you get rid of the layers of masks. But the biggest mask we wear is the one to ourselves, right? And creativity for me is how do I understand myself better in order to remove that mask and make sure that the intention that I have matches the actions that I take. So that's one thing I definitely do in life is to make sure that the intentionality I hold informs the action. So I'm not reactive, I'm active. And I think that is a core principle of creativity in my book.
I like that. I actually never explained it the way you just did it, but when I talk to my students telling them about creativity, I always try to explain them that reflecting yourself is so important to really understand yourself, and that can help you to really unleash your very own creativity, because there's not like one single way of doing something new, right? And being creative, everybody has his or her own way of finding the way through and developing something.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
And it's a lens, right? Because from what you've just said, that creativity is a lens. So, there's all sorts of examples, in psychology where the way we're brought up, right? We sort of become molded in a way that we see the world through a particular lens. But the more open that lens is, the more open to new information and new things and things that you may not understand. I think that's where creativity definitely sits.
The only question is always, how do we train or work on that in a very practical way, right? So that's always a question. If someone approaches you with that question, what would you say to that person?
So that's, again, a good question. And for me, it's about lateral thinking. So I think we get into a cycle in our personal lives and professional lives where it's, here is a question or something which one responds to based on the parameters of the question that's being asked. But actually, the answer may be in something completely different. So, for instance, if someone says, hey, I want to design a new shoe, It's not about looking at other people who have designed shoes. Maybe you go and look at somebody who plants trees. Maybe you look at somebody who, I don't know, fishes, right? And see if you can learn and distill patterns that may trigger new ways of connecting what it is that the answer could be to designing that shoe. Do you see what I mean? And that's the way I think I would teach it, is to think laterally rather than linearly.
Do you still think there are some areas or some things that hinder us from being creative? Maybe also from your experience from the past. Have you always been this open for creativity, for lateral thinking, for new perspectives? Or have you also experienced something that hindered you or that blocked you from being that way?
It's only lately, I would say in the last maybe decade, I'm able to actually be open and actually sort of use that as a way to move conversations forwards and projects forward. But the thing that's always stopped that, I think, is it's communication, right? So when it's about, that phrase of you may be listened to, but you're not really being heard. And I think that is a big barrier, because I've found that, especially in my early architectural career, people have an idea of what is right and wrong, right? They're right and wrong. And they will impose that onto what they think your right and wrong should be. So therefore, it doesn't leave any room for you to make mistakes, to explore, to experiment. And that's been a big barrier. And personally, and it's something that I think a lot about, is diversity, sort of this notion of being inclusive, seeing the world as something that can enhance your creativity, your point of view. That's always been a barrier as well, because I think people make snap judgments on who you are, the way you look, what you say. And I think that's a barrier for a lot of us. But I found it particularly hard to be creative and create as openly as I want to, because of those kind of systemic things that we're now, I think, generationally trying to get out.
But how did you overcome that? That's super interesting, because I think now you know that is something that is blocking you, and now you can handle it. You can deal with it in a better way. But some people don't actually. And what would you tell them how they can get out of it, or what do you do maybe today if it still encounters you in a certain situation? How do you deal with it sometimes, or what would you recommend to do?
Don't be afraid to be wrong, and don't care what other people think, and be loud. Because stand up for your point of view, because that's the thing, right? Because it's when you become part of a system, so a business or whatever, it's hard not to react to the people around you, the peer pressure and so forth. So it's just about being clear and confident about what you believe, be happy with being wrong, and also just don't care about, what other people's impressions might be. And I used to fall foul of that all the time. And it's taken me a long time to go, do you know what? I like my voice. I have a point of view. I'm not saying it's right, but I believe it's right, and stick up for that. And I think that will take you a long way to break through those barriers.
I like that view. And I would like to add another thought, because you were mentioning this thing of, okay, other people have a perception of what is right or wrong. It's kind of a judgment they do or they have, right? In terms of what you were presenting, what idea or whatever. And I think it's very important to defer this judgment, or not judge others' ideas in a very early phase of being creative, right? But the challenge is, when I talk to the people at some point after being divergent, right, spinning around with a lot of different ideas, there's this convergent phase where you have to boil it down, where you have to narrow it down and say, okay, this is the thing I want to go forward. And by doing that, you have to judge in a way, right? So I always think of like a light switch in my brain, and you have to know in which situation you defer judgment, you kind of switch it off, and in which moment you switch it on in a way, right? So, and I think this is the beauty, I guess, about creativity. It's about managing this trade-off in a way, and knowing in which situation which way is better. But I think that's also a good explanation why it is so hard to be creative. And that's the way I always look into this field of judgment, right or wrong. I don't know, what is your perception on that? Do you have any recommendations how you can train that, switching on and off this judgment or whatever? I don't know.
That's really insightful, because I think so judgment for me is directly related to reaction, right? So when you react, i.e., you use your frame of reference and your worldview to sort of judge somebody else. What you are talking about there is actually a process of, thinking through a problem, going through that sort of creativity cycle, which is the sort of, divergent, emergent, and convergent sort of cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And when you do divergent thinking, so whenever I, sort of do any exercise with organizations around creativity, it's funny, actually, the first thing I have to do is actually therapy, because you've got to make them realize there's another way of thinking. Then you go through the cycle of think, but don't judge, right? Second, the emergent is let's think together to create what the possibilities are. But when you do this thing, as you said, you have to focus in. That's not judgment, because that's actually a sort of collective evolution of, ideas and what you feel may serve purpose to the problem that's set out. And it's interesting because here's my answer to your question is, whenever you go into a situation, I think very few people think about what is the question being asked. All they think about is what is the answer I need to give. And actually, I spend a lot of my time rebriefing. So, an organization will say, hey, I want to go into the metaverse. Okay. Do you understand what the metaverse is? And you have to fine tune the question that they are really asking. So creativity has a lot to do with psychology and understanding interpersonal communication before you can actually generate good, forward-facing, innovative ideas.
That's true. And the power of creativity lies on the problem side, or what you were saying, like briefing, like what is the core question, right? I totally agree. Yeah. I like that discussion around creativity, but from my side, I don't know, BB, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would like to learn a little bit more about your journey, your life journey.
Sure.
So that's a very broad question. I know it's tough to answer, I guess, but can you tell us a little bit about your journey in life? And probably you have some connections to creativity you can make.
Sure. So to start from where we left off, so I was telling you that I always wanted to write and make films. So, but I don't believe in being second best, right? So I did the architecture, which was 7 years. I then did an MBA and another master's because I was like, okay, let's focus. And I started focusing on this area called sociospatial analysis, which was it's essentially management consultancy for spatial environments, right? So it's like, how do I make these more effective? How do we understand things like interaction, make choices, how people make choices in spatial environments. But then I actually gave it all up. I was doing really well. I gave it all up because I wanted to do a master's in screenwriting. So I went and did that, and I was going to write films. But essentially my career then, both of those tacks, the filmmaking and the architecture, came together. And I went into transmedia, interactive, and then have come out in immersive. And all of those skills, to be honest, have been fundamental in being able to think creatively, think differently, and actually sort of add value. So, it's weird. It's all come full circle now because the metaverse, it has a spatial element. So I'm finding myself in a lot of discussions about how I design the spatial environment of the metaverse. So it's fundamentally amazing that I can use the skills I learned as an architect to evolve what I'm doing now. But there's two parts to my life right now. There's a sort of strategic part, dealing with organizations and moving them in, looking at the creative potential of immersive. But I also do, if money was no object, I would tell immersive stories, powerful stories, in order to create social impact. So I have two facets in my life, and I work on those as equally as I can.
Okay, beautiful. Do you have an example for those immersive stories you would like to tell if money is not an issue? Do you have any examples?
I do. And in fact, there's an article I'd be happy to share with your readers and yourselves if that's of use, because,
sure.
Earlier we were saying that storytelling is at the core. But the other thing that's at the core of what I do is empathy. I'm an empathy engineer. So I love this notion of how we can connect, as I was saying. So one of the things that I've realized is, and I talk about this in the article, if you look at some of these films, like they sort of say, hey, we're making a social point and we are going to change the discourse on a particular topic, right? But then they release the film and there's some impact, and then maybe they're nominated for an Oscar, there's some impact. What questions have they actually answered? What difference have they actually made in the real world? So I don't know if you know about forced marriages and honor crimes. These exist mainly in sort of Indian communities where, women are forced into marriages. And if they don't agree, then they are, killed in the name of honor. And it's horrific stories. So my current project is, can I tell powerful enough stories in order to turn audiences from passive to dynamic and become advocates, so they go out into the real world and help to eradicate forced marriages and honor crimes for the world. So I have a feature, there's a VR film, there's an immersive theater piece, and all of these have been designed to create an ecology that create first-person participatory engagement, so we can go out and deliver impact. So that's one example of some of the work I'm doing in that field.
Nice. I like that.
How can I imagine it, this immersive things you create? How can persons experience it? Can you maybe explain it in more detail?
Yeah, sure. So there's one fundamental difference in the experience. And actually, this dovetails into the conversation about immersive and metaverse. Anything that has the arbiter of a screen is third person and passive in my view, right? So I'm talking to you through a screen. As soon as you build a virtual world around someone or you create immersion, you create a first person participatory dynamic or possibility. And that's where the answer to your question is. It's about, how do I create entertainment or an educationally sort of, minded piece of entertainment, which allows people to get as close as possible to the content. So I break the barriers between the content and the audience. So whether that is using an AR app, whether it is actually watching a film, but writing the film and experiencing the film, knowing that it's one part of a bigger story world, is the kind of things that I'm experimenting with at the moment. But one note of caution on that is, when I say empathy, I don't mean that just because you watch a VR film, you are going to know what it's like to be a Syrian refugee. All we are saying is that we get a bit closer to try and understand on a granular level what that experience might be and how we can relate it to our own value system. I can give you an example of that if you like, if that helps this discussion.
Sure. Yeah, please.
So the BBC, I did a project on, it's called the Syrian refugee experience. I think you can still Google it and play through it. But it was fun, but also it kind of didn't go the way that we really wanted it to. But one of the things that was important was we created this experience and it was getting lots and lots of views, but people were then sort of cutting off quite soon after the experience. And there was this interview with a guy who, his mum gave him a pair of shoes and said, look, if you're now going to do this, please wear these shoes because I don't want you to be uncomfortable. And he was so touched, he kept the shoes. And only when he got to freedom, he put the shoes on, right? So it became like a token for him. Now, it made us think about this question of, I was talking to you before about what is the actual question. The question is, what's the one thing I would not leave behind if my whole world was falling down around me? So you both can relate to that question. I can. And we can then start to have empathy by proxy to maybe what this person or these people are going through. So that was fundamentally important because it elongated the engagement of the audience with the stories being told.
Beautiful example, how you use your creativity to engage people with a very, very important topic. Nice. That brings me to the switch to the, if money is an issue in your life side, right? I mean, you, as Bibi already said, you worked for Facebook, or now called Meta. Can you tell us a little bit more? What did you do there? How did you join Facebook? What made it with yourself? How did you change probably also as a person? What did you learn? Also, especially about Metaverse probably and creativity.
So it was an interesting journey. I saw via LinkedIn, actually. So the opportunity came up and it was a contract rather than a full-time thing. And the title was a very grand title of Global Creative Product Lead for VR. But essentially what the role was within Facebook, obviously you've got the Oculus platform, which is, very much tailored at that stage towards gaming and entertainment. And then you had essentially Facebook under the hood was and still is an advertising company, right? So they have clients all around the world. So my job was, how do I link or show the potential of immersive for enterprise, for commercial impact? So it was literally talking to, clients across all verticals and saying, well, here is the potential of immersive and what it can do to enhance your business, your brand in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So that was essentially my job as that conduit between enterprise and what Meta were doing in the immersive field.
Cool. And could you maybe give an insight without mentioning the company name, of course? A concrete example, what you did and how you translated that.
Sure. So one good example of it, in fact, I'll give you three, right? So the first one was the immersive and VR and what's now, the move towards Metaverse. It's not about replacing or replicating the real world. It's about augmenting it. It's about adding value to it. And one of the things we did which was I thought fundamental, was how can you feel in VR, right? So how could I essentially use, my senses to evoke a fragrance or pick up an object and say, this one weighs less than this one, using just the controllers and the headset. So I led a project which was very much about how is it that you can, really enhance the experience of, say, buying a bike or a car. How could I literally put the headset on and know what it's like to drive, hear the sound of the engine, for instance, and come all the way out and buy it without taking my headset off. And that was fundamental in terms of bringing the experience to you rather than you having to go to the experience. And talking about sensorial marketing, there was another project where we volumetrically recreated a store. And the idea was that you walk through, because remember, you are defying things like gravity, time, distance, right? They don't matter in VR. So we were creating these mind-blowing, imaginary environments where they were directly related to the brand. But the lesson here is that you can't operate at the brand level. You have to operate at the core brand value level. It was all about value systems. And it goes back to the example I've just given you about the Syrian refugees. If you don't find that point of connection, the VR immersive doesn't work, because it's all about, as Chris Milk says, building an empathy engine. And that was mind-blowing. So, and the third example is you've mentioned Charlotte Tilbury already, but that was a great project in terms of, well, what does it mean? What does beauty mean? How do we actually sort of enhance that? And how do we actually make that relate to who we are as a person? So that, I can't say much more than that, but it was a fundamental project, which was essentially about who you are as a person and altering, the way in which you perceive, things like makeup, And the conclusion here is, let me say this, that in all the projects, the key learning was that businesses want to just veneer on solutions. They say, immersive. Let's build an immersive application and stick it onto what we already do. But unless you fundamentally alter your brand DNA and repivot your business to be ready for an immersive future, you will not do this properly. And that's why we're seeing the market fall in the way it is.
Yeah, impressive learnings.
And what's the customer side? Do they accept it, or how do they accept it? Did they like it, or did they actually use it? Because I think sometimes it's also a bit scary for me to see everything coming into the virtual world, because I love the physical and the real interaction. And how do the customers react to the projects that you had with the companies?
So again, do you remember we talked about shades of grey, right? So this is, it's not either be virtual or be in the real world. There's a spectrum. So like it's an immersive experience isn't just about being within another environment. So you could use IoT, the Internet of Things, to activate experiences which enhance the real world, or AR, which augments information or the experience of how you might actually look at something on your desk, for instance. So in terms of how customers are experiencing it, there's the early adopters, right? People who really want to get into this and who are finding value in doing one fundamental thing, right? And this is my big sort of advice to brands, is that you need to transition from a culture of buy to a culture of belong, because it's not about transaction. So what I'm finding, and remember, this is very new, right? It's nascent, we're still experimenting. But what I'm finding is there's this shift. What people are doing traditionally when it's coming to marketing, PR, audience engagement is they are inspiring people, right, to transact. So you'll create something, people go, oh, wow, let me buy that. And that is it, right? And it's a short-term cycle. But what we need to do, and where we're moving to, is we need to create a mode of aspiration, right? So it's about the self in order to advocate, right? And then transaction becomes a byproduct. So it's all about this, creating a community around the brand. Like Nike is a great example, with Nike. None of it is about selling you stuff. It's about belonging to this community called Nike, right? Mm-hmm. So even the new trainers released as NFTs, it's modular. You get to be part of that. It's that notion of personalization, collaboration, and decentralization. Those are the three tenets of where businesses need to move.
Interesting. It's not about selling, but about belonging. So yeah, I like that. So let's just switch the perspective here a little bit, because I'm also curious about your perception of how creative is Facebook or Meta or other companies you probably also worked with, because what we're trying to do here at Siemens is we try to promote this beautiful human ability of creativity and also kind of educate the people about, but also support them in being creative and creating the new innovations of the future. So do you have any perception of how creative is Meta? How do they support the creativity of the individuals, of you probably in that project? What are the things that support creativity in an organizational setting, and what's your perception on that, probably during your life, but also only focusing on Meta?
I'll answer that question a bit more generally rather than sort of giving specific examples. But let me just deep dive into Meta. I think, if I'm being honest, my experience there was actually quite a, not difficult, but it was a hard experience in terms of exactly what you've said, because it's such a big organization. As hard as it tries to say that it is open, collaborative, and creative, the experience is actually a bit different because it has to be structured in some kind of way. And I think, just to extrapolate from that, I think that's one thing organizations, I think there's a massive gap between what they say they are doing when it comes to creativity and what they're actually doing. And I think there's two reasons for that. Is it's still a hierarchy and it's fueled by ego. And it's the ego says, this is the way we do it. And then that's filtered down, rather than it being the other way around, where you go, hey, who are you? Teach us something and let's learn together and collaborate. And second, it's money, because R&D is always the last thing that gets any kind of substantial money, right? And for me, it needs to be the other way around. It's like, I have yet to work for an organization. If I ever set up a company, I would love to think that I would want to set up an ecology of just experimentation, because that for me is what will fuel creativity. There were so many examples where it's about listening. So there's lots of answers to this, but it really is about listening clearly and giving people that opportunity. And I don't think that can exist in big organizations. So it's funny, but creativity was very siloed. So therefore, there was a few people who were hidden away doing it, and then everyone else is told what to do. And which is cool, but it's not conducive to collaboration and also something that's truly open source. For me, creativity needs to be open source, right? And the metaverse, for instance, at the moment, even though it implies open source, is still an oligopoly, right? Because it's owned by about 4 companies who are doing all the virtual real estate work. And it needs people to hack that in order for us to really, truly be creative, open, and collaborative.
I like that claim. Let's make creativity open source. Could be our title of the podcast. Beautiful. Yeah. Anything else you want to know, Bibi?
How did you try to, I'll call it, promote creativity anyhow, still within the company? Or how did you live creativity within your job anyways?
Within the projects that I worked on at Meta, so I went through a process with clients, right? So the first part of it, which was something called a discovery meeting with clients. And it was great because you have a client who goes, what the hell is this? Why should I listen to you? And we've got us going, hey, immersive is cool. So that was the most, the biggest opportunity to be creative, because you have tension, right? And in tension grows, creative solutions. So that's where I was able to be the most creative, because I was literally the only person who was going in, going, hey, this is what immersive is. This is what it could do with you. Do for you. And then I went through an agile workshop and rapid prototyping process to show them what the potential was. And behavior change, mindset change, that is the best outcome of creative thinking. So that was mind-blowing. And I've tried to apply that to everything I've done since. So the projects I'm involved with at the moment, so one of them is, how do we create a global immersive medical school? So is there a way that I could deliver medical education around the world? And you have to be able to think creativity, i.e., don't have any boundaries, learn how to listen, define the problem, and make sure that you think laterally about how to deliver the best solution. So I think that's an answer to your question, but that's kind of my response to it.
Challenge time!
We have a little creative challenge for you. Just a little.
We have that for every podcast. A little creative challenge to spark your creativity. For that, we have 4 questions prepared for you. Maybe, I don't know if you just keep it in mind. It's really easy, short answers, or you write it down. But with those 4 answers, because obviously you're a storyteller, I'm sure you will tell us a great story. Because with that 4 answers, you create your own little story to us, to our listeners, and inspire us. Okay, are you ready for the questions?
Sure.
Okay, so the first question is, who was your idol when you were little?
Good question. Who was my idol?
Your father.
No, he was definitely not my idol. So, in fact, if we're talking about that, it's actually my mum. My mum would have been my idol. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You want me to tell you why, or?
Yeah, you can share if you want to. Sure.
It's up to you. Actually, no. Let's save it. I'll save it for the story. Okay, my mum.
Yeah. Second question: what is a really funny or surprising or crazy fact about yourself that you love to do?
Lego mosaics.
Oh.
I make big mosaics with very small pieces and photographs.
Nice.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. And third question, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
That's a really good question. Do you know, it's to be able to think clearly. That would be my superpower. Like to think beyond the world, like to think on a universe level. Thinking without limitations, Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. And last question.
Questions. Where is your next journey heading to? Do you have any business trip, any vacation planned? Just a location where you're next heading to?
Yeah, Spain. So Madrid.
Nice.
So these were the 4 questions. And now feel free to tell us a creative story.
Incorporating all of those 4 parts, right? Madrid. It's Lego mosaic. It's thinking without limits, and it's your mom.
Yeah,
like you can take your time. It's not like you don't have to shoot out right away.
Yeah, this is great. My mum was born in Madrid, and she by the seaside. But it was a town that existed. It was a little island just off of, just out. If you go out to the coast, and there's a little island. But she always classed herself as being from Madrid. But from that island, all the people were born as fragments. They weren't born whole. They were born as fragments because they, the way the world had gone, as they'd evolved, you weren't born a whole person. So you had to find all of your component pieces. And my mum was like, she desperately wanted to, find her family. She always wanted a family, right? She wanted to have children. But before she could have children, she had to find herself. And so she decided to leave the island because people weren't really allowed to leave. But she decided, one day I'm going to leave. So she left and she sort of rode across and she started a journey to find. And the only thing that she could see was that she had this stone that her father gave her. And it was clear. But her father said, look, whenever you're lost, if you look through this stone, you will get a signal as to where to go to find the rest of who you are and, put the pieces together. So she did this, and the journey led her all around the world, and she picked up these little fragments, but slowly she started to put herself back together again. But the final piece, the heart, right, that's the key thing she needed before she could have a family. She couldn't find anywhere on the earth. And she was sad, she was crying, it's like, I'm not whole, what do I do? And she listened, she just thought about her father, and she thought, there's only one thing, what? And she heard his voice. And he said, you keep looking straight in front, but you never look up. Look up to find the truth. Look beyond where you are now. So she took the stone, she looked up, and she saw it. But the last piece was not on earth. She had to sort of let herself, all the fragments, she had to let go of all the fragments in order to be able to go up and get this piece. Because what she realized is that was the first piece she needed, not the last. So she went out, got that piece, came back, put everything together, and then she became whole again. And that is how she was then able to have a family.
Wow.
Very good. That was a really a story compared to all the others. They kept it really short, but now we understand that you're really an immersive storyteller. So I was immersed in that story, even though we only had the screen here and we're like only connected in a digital way. But beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing
very
this.
Impressed. Thanks a lot for sharing that.
No,
beautiful. Cool. And I think there's only one little topic left, and I think we already touched upon that like regularly, the topic of Metaverse.
Yeah.
And I think we owe our listeners a little bit of an explanation probably here, and we can also like dive a little bit more into that if you want. And that leads me to the first question. So we talked about it, but can you explain it very briefly? What is the Metaverse?
So first thing I want to say on the whole conversation of Metaverse, right? So it's really interesting. There are already people calling themselves Metaverse experts. There's no such thing. Even though I'm privileged that I may be able to offer you some insights because of the work that I've done, no one knows what the Metaverse is. I don't know what it is or where it's going. But in terms of what the intention is it's like a set of, it's like an environment within which you can create like connective tissue, between the real world, online environments, and really find a way to connect with people around the world, right? So that's essentially what the component parts of the Metaverse are. But if I was to dumb it down even more or simplify it, the definition is it's like a 3D website, right? So it's the next evolution of what a website is. So if you think about the website now, it's a website, but with a spatial element to it, right? Something that has a physical dimensionality to it. And within that physical dimension, your digital twin is like your digital representation is going to walk around, engage, and be a direct connection to you. So that's where I would say my sort of messy definition of what a metaverse is.
And how can, like, if you think about this metaverse and now it comes into play in the future, what could be the positive outcome for the world, for us people, but also probably a negative outcome for us, or probably challenges, however you want to call it?
So let's start with the negative or the challenging. It's like, I think a lot of the conversations I'm part of, the key questions that come up are, hey, if there's so much freedom and openness, won't people start to troll you, or won't there be sort of like cyberbullying and abuse and so forth? And, my answer to that is that was the case when mobile phones came out. That was the case when the internet came out. It's just the next evolution. So we've learned some lessons from all of that stuff. It's not going to stop, but maybe we can be a little bit more insightful about how we can solve those things. And I think that the big fear is that it's going to become some dystopian future where because everyone's so depressed or seemingly depressed, they're going to just resort to being in the metaverse and almost like an addiction, live another life vicariously because they can't stand their own life. I don't think that that's the case, because I think that here it's an opportunity to have another resource to enhance the life you are living in the real world. Now, I am not an advocate of living your life virtually or in the metaverse. I like living my life in the real world. What I love about it is that I have more access to tools and resources where I can live different experiences. I can create things with people around the world. I can have and enhance the way in which I communicate and engage. I love that. So I think the positive side of this is what the metaverse, I think, is becoming is, and if it becomes open source, is this ecology within which you have, a whole other world that you can engage with and use to sort of add value to what you're doing in the real world anyway. And I'm really excited for that, So that would be my answer.
Yeah, interesting. I would say, about this fear of addiction. Right now, today, we also kind of have this addiction to our phones. It's also an addiction to the virtual world, right? It's just not that immersive probably, but there's also the challenge here already. So that will not change with the metaverse. So I totally agree. I think the biggest fear, what I always hear when I talk to people about that topic, is that they fear losing this real connection with people and this real interaction and meeting and having social experiences in real life. And I think that's probably a little bit the fear, especially with this experience around the COVID pandemic situation, right, where we all were distant from each other. But I think even, or especially the COVID situation, taught us the value of real social events where you come together in a room and you really meet. And I think that especially helps in like learning to adopt the metaverse probably the way it is good for us, right? Rather augmenting our real life than just replacing it or whatever. I think that's a good perception for the future of the metaverse, I guess.
And I agree with you. It's actually totally the opposite. You actually get to connect with people. And one provocative question I have for your listeners is, before they make any kind of snap judgment about the value of the metaverse and immersive, how many people have actually put on a VR headset and gone through an experience? So if you have gone through it, then I will listen. But if you haven't, then I don't think you understand the value of what this is, because there's a whole other way of connecting that you get in a virtual environment. And I think it enhances real world connection. Like some of the work that's been done in mental health with, 360 film and so forth, I think is actually groundbreaking in terms of, really pushing the boundaries of how we are able to deliver health, recovery, connection, and those kind of things.
Agree. And what's the positive side? What brings the metaverse to us people?
So I think...
I mean, you touched upon it already, I know, but can you just...
Here's the first thing, when we talk about blockchain, right? So everyone's sort of going on about NFTs and the market's all falling out the bottom of that. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. It's like decentralization is a wonderful concept and framework for us to take forward. And I think that's one of the key positives of what the metaverse offers, which is we get control over our expression, our creativity, and the way in which we wish to connect and just live our lives, right? So I think that's one absolute positive. Second, it's another play space. It's an ecology, right? It's like, how cool is it that I can sort of now go and play around in, Nightland or Fortnite or Roblox and just, be part of experiences with people around the world that I could never have done before. And I think that's an absolute positive. And third, it's a blank canvas. There are basically what we have now got is about 1,000, maybe 1 million new tools to be creative with. And it's just amazing. Like one example, Tilt Brush, I don't know if you've used it, and ZBrush and all of these other things. It's like you are in a virtual space. And by the way, it's not all virtual. So we're talking about AR, XR and all this. But, virtual reality, I think, lends itself a lot to this argument, where you are painting, but you create painting around you. And then you can scale it down, scale it up. So you are within the painting that you are creating. I will never forget the first time I designed something in Unity on my computer, put my headset on, and the design process went from there, from my head to my heart. Because then you are emotionally reacting to, wow, I created this. I want a tree to be over there, and I want it to be this high. It's mind-blowing. And I think that is really going to enhance the way in which we think about creativity.
That's so crazy because I've never experienced it myself. So now at the moment, I cannot really imagine it, but it sounds really exciting and inspiring. So maybe someday I have the chance to do that. What I'm wondering is, how do people really engage or connect with each other? Do you maybe have one of the most inspiring metaverse applications or use cases you could share with us? Or did you mention them already maybe? Where people could really connect and engage with each other and maybe be creative together and have this kind of experience?
I think it's about this challenge about the senses you were touching upon in one of the project with Meta, I guess, right? And I think really connecting is about feeling,
exactly. And
smelling,
it's
and all that, right? And not
it's
just
new ways to get to know yourself. I don't think there's a specific answer to your question. I think there's a more generic one, right? And there's lots of simple examples I can give to this. So there's a very basic application called Ritchie's Plank Experience, for instance, right? Where you walk out on a plank and it's on a high-rise building. Now, I know that I am in my room, but I still cannot do this experience because I'm scared of heights, right? Now, the reason for telling you this is it's not about that. What it's about is this. Like Usain Bolt talks about this. He says they did an experiment where they looked at the neural sort of, mapping of his brain, and the same neurons fired when he was thinking about running as when he was actually running, right? Now, that's mind-blowing, because what it means is that you can take like embedded memory, you can take experiential memories and augment them into the experiences that you create. So, for instance, with the sensorial marketing stuff, if you've got a fragrance, like obviously in VR, if I'm going to, spray something, you can't smell it because I'm not spraying anything physical or tangible. But by relating the image of a pomegranate with, how the neurons fire and finding out exactly what I can show you in front of you to evoke that smell through sort of collected memory is mind-blowing in terms of an application, right?
That's
crazy. Fantastic, and
that's really mind-blowing. Wow.
And I can see why people would be like, hold on a second, why would we want to do that if I can actually spray a fragrance in real life? But that's not the point, right? We're learning, we're advancing, we're finding new ways to deliver experiences. That's all we're doing. So it's up to us. It's our collective responsibility as a society to, again, not see it as either virtual or real world. It's about shades of grey. It's about not being binary.
What just came to my mind, could it be also the case that could help fighting fears, for example? I mean, you just talked about the example with, if I would be afraid of heights, I wouldn't go up a very high building voluntarily. But maybe with this experience within the metaverse or VR or something, you can, train it.
Absolutely. It's about solving problems. So, for instance, there's a whole application around PTSD. So we're not just talking about VR, also 360 film, to be actually immersed in and embedded into an actual experience that you can look around. So there's a film called Traveling While Black, which talks about the sort of, the African-American experience in America. It's mind-blowing that you can just sit, but because the experience is happening around you and the way the story is being told, you really feel viscerally connected to that story. Now, similarly, with this guy who had his the PTSD thing, there's a whole application about making you face up to something that is within a safe environment. There was another guy who had his hand, sort of chopped off in the war or blown off or whatever. But you've got in VR, because of the mapping I was talking about, where you can actually sort of, like, he knows what it feels like to open and close his hand on the hand that was chopped off. So in VR, he's got both his hands, right? And that just helps emotionally, cognitively with so many things. And I just want to lead it back to, organizations like yourselves, like Siemens and other sort of organizations. It's not just about marketing or audience engagement. It's about problem solving as well. It's like in architecture, when I did architecture, if I had VR now, what is now available back then, it would have been amazing, because I could build a whole building, show you how you can walk through it, show you the materials, show you, everything about that experience in a very cost-effective way. And we can problem solve before we build it in the real world. So anything like that would just be amazing. So factory automation. How would we solve a factory automation problem, right, in VR? It's all about foresight and insight in a cost-effective way to deliver solutions that are sustainable in the long term in the real world.
We have not solved that creative challenge, because like building the metaverse and exploring it is a creative challenge in itself, I guess, right? But I think that brings us to the closing of our podcast, and I guess...
No, just our final closing question.
Otherwise, we conclude always with the final question to you, Adi. What is the thing you would like to share, like probably related to all the discussion we had, but what's the one thing you would like to share with the listeners related to metaverse, creativity, your life, your experience,
I think
immersive storytelling?
With all the talk around immersive and metaverse and the work that I've been doing, I think there is a real human element here, which is a need for us as a society to be more open-minded about what possibilities are, and to allow for change in a meaningful and positive way. That's number one. Number two, I think because of if you think about empathy as a business driver, and at the core of what immersive can offer. I think any problem that needs a solution in any business across any vertical could embed a social impact factor into everything that they do. So we could collectively start to really think about the world as a unified entity that we could make better through the work we're already doing. And third is, I think it's just about, understanding that this whole notion of the metaverse is still a work in progress, and it's okay to experiment and explore and make mistakes, and we should allow for those mistakes to happen. Otherwise, we will not find the best way forward. Those would be my
Thank you very much.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Adi. It was really, really insightful and very inspiring.
Really good. I'm glad.
Yes. So it was great to have you here within this podcast. I learned a lot, at least. I hope all the listeners as well. And yeah, let's hope for more creativity in the future.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So I really hope it's valuable. I really hope the listeners engage with it.